Watershed districts, but we're located in the Southwest Metro, and we're a local unit of government, and our mission is to protect and improve water resources within the land area we manage. 9 Mile Creek has been impaired for chloride since 2004. So we were put on the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency's impaired water list for chloride back in 2004, for so quite a while ago. And what this means in simple terms is that there are unhealthy levels of chloride in 9 Mile Creek. And so in 2010, a TMDL, or total maximum daily load, was developed for 9 Mile Creek. And this really laid out how much salt was getting into the creek and how much we had to reduce the amount of salt being applied within our watershed to get the creek healthy again. And I started working for 9 Mile Creek in 2012. And so we've spent a lot of time investigating salt issues in the watershed, working to educate the public and other entities we work with, and really safely reduce the amount of salt being applied in the watershed. And as part of this, we are also very interested in new findings, new things coming out, new questions too, and other ways we can look at reducing chloride potentially getting into 9 Mile Creek. So as Leslie mentioned, these salt pools have come up again and again more recently, and like these outstanding questions of how are pools managed? What is happening to this water? Is it a problem? Is this contributing to the salt loads in 9 Mile Creek? Were really intriguing. So this was a great opportunity to work with the city of Minnetonka, work with the Humphrey School, and try and get some of those questions answered. And so this was a really great project for us to be able to partner on. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to Leslie.
All right, thank you, Erica. And just to point out, Brooke was a part of this project as well, but she was not able to attend today. So a little bit of housekeeping before I turn it over to the Capstone group. I am recording the session. I neglected to at the very beginning, but I finally remembered. So we are recording this. And then if at the end, if you have or by the time we get to the end, we will do a Q&A session. If you have questions, even in the meantime, please enter them into the chat box, and then we will monitor that. And then when they complete the presentation, we will then take questions for the Capstone group. So with that, I will turn it over to Dan. He is going to kick it off and introduce the Capstone team from the Humphrey, and then they will proceed with their presentation.
Thanks, Leslie. And Leslie, Erica, and Brooke, thanks for being such great clients to work with during this process. I'm Dan Tengwall. I'm a Master of Public Affairs student at the Humphrey School. I have a concentration on local government, and I'll graduate from the program at the end of this summer.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ashley Dziuk, and I am a Master of Public Affairs student concentrating in environmental and climate justice, and I will be graduating in December of this year.
My name is John Smith. I am a second year science, technology, and environmental policy student at the Humphrey School of Public Affairs, and I will be graduating this coming spring.
Hi, my name is Eric Howard. I'm a second year MPA student at the Humphrey School of Public Affairs, and my concentration is in philanthropy.
So today, you all are going to be doing what our group, the four of us, have done for the past couple months, learning about swimming pools. Before we get into that, I want to return back to the Menti survey that we did, just to get an idea of who we're presenting to today. We thought this would be a good opportunity to just kind of survey our guests here. So if you haven't gotten a chance, the QR code, what you do is you take your phone, you act like you're taking a photo of the QR code, a link pops up, you click that link, go into Menti, and then it asks you whether you own a traditional chlorine pool, a salt chlorine pool, or no pool at all. So John, what have we got for the results so far?
We've got 13 responses so far, and exactly 0% of respondents own a pool.
All right, so we'll go with that for now. Yeah, that's similar to when our group started a couple months ago. We were interested in this project, but none of us really had the background of what goes into a pool, right? So just to give you an idea of what our agenda looks like today, we're going to have the presentation that includes reviewing the project and objectives or research questions. We'll then give background and describe how our work was completed with the methods section. Following that, we'll inform you of the results we observed with the key findings. And then after that, we'll move on to our 4 recommendations for the project. As Leslie said, we're going to have plenty of time for Q&A after the presentation. So feel free to lower your questions into the chat box or hang on to them until the end, however you want to do that. So for those of you that don't know, pools are fun, okay? And that's illustrated by the photo number 1 on the left-hand side of your screen. So these photos were taken at a recent family get-together that I had, where my cousin Josh was able to walk me through his salt-chlorine pool. So the pool that you're seeing in the photo on the left, that's my 3-year-old son George jumping into the pool. And Josh, my cousin, was able to walk me through kind of the process and the setup of this pool. It's the first time I had ever been in one before. And so salt-chlorine pools are swimming pools that use salt-chlorine generators, which companies sell. They are installed to keep pools clean and usable. So the second photo that you see in the middle, it's more of a diagram. You can see that the generators use technology that requires the water to be at a certain level of saltiness, and that's usually measured in parts per million. The salty water goes into the generator, and then a reaction occurs and it creates chlorine. The photo on the right-hand top side, number 3, that's my cousin's salt-chlorine generator. So the generator's on the left, more of the round object, and the one on the right is the pool heater. And then he's able to, or a pool owner is able to adjust water levels with the panel shown on the 4th photo, bottom right. So we want to provide an overview of some of the areas that we'll be discussing today. Our project's research sought to examine how excess chloride from salt-chlorine pools, and we're going to be calling those SCPs, that's what we're going to be referring them to on the screen, how SCPs would be contributing to pollution in the 9 Mile Creek watershed. Erica covered this already, but we just wanted to give you a visual. The slide here illustrates the area that we'll be speaking about. The 9 Mile Creek watershed is located on the western portion of the Twin Cities metro area. It includes the following cities: Minnetonka, Hopkins, Eden Prairie, Edina, Richfield, and Bloomington.
And so the scope of our work focused on 3 overarching questions. The first was exactly kind of what we've talked about a little bit. How much chloride, a known cause of environmental harm, do salt chlorine pools contribute to the watershed? Sort of stemming from that, we wanted to know what policy or regulatory interventions could address chloride from salt chlorine pools within the watershed as a whole. And then stepping outside of kind of that line of questions, we also wanted to understand how could environmental justice and equity concerns interact with this issue. Specifically, how could that body of knowledge inform future policy, whether directed at controlling salt chlorine pools or other issues of similar scope. And as we were kind of, understanding those questions and looking to address those, we started digging a little bit into the background and context with this issue. Erica gave a great overview of this as well, but the high level kind of background is, 9 Mile Creek has one of the highest concentrations of chloride within the Minnesota River Basin. So this graph here shows the median annual flow weighted mean concentration. So concentrations of chloride adjusted for the water body's flow in the dashed line on the bottom there. The 9 Mile Creek specifically is boxed in gold, and that you can see has a significantly higher than median concentration of chloride. Looking over time, as Erica mentioned, that was sort of, compromised in 2004. But even going back to 1999, we've seen significant increases in that flow adjusted concentration. The 9 Mile Creek Watershed District's visual here shows about 111% increase in that concentration between 1999 and 2019. So the backdrop of this research is really studying a water body of elevated and growing concentrations of chloride. And I will pass it to Dan to describe our methods.
Thanks, John. So during our project, we explored both qualitative and quantitative research methods. Our work started with a literature review to understand the complexity of the chloride portion of the project. Unfortunately, there wasn't a lot of information available about salt-chlorine pools in our search. We also searched for drainage regulations in the 9 Mile Creek watershed cities and hope to find examples of environmental justice and equity on the topic that matches with our research questions. So after the literature review, we moved on to stakeholder interviews with various local government staff in Minnesota. We were intentional about speaking with at least one staff member from each of the watershed's 6 cities, and we were able to do that. We also wanted to go further than the 9 Mile Creek watershed, and so our team reached out to several municipalities in the southwestern part of the United States, where we knew pools would be more prevalent. We ended up connecting with a city employee from Santa Clarita, California. We spoke with them about their history of regulating installation and of chlorine pools. And that was a pretty interesting story that we might talk about in a little bit. We also contacted pool companies to learn about the sales, installation, and maintenance of a salt chlorine pool. About halfway into our interviews, we discovered that we lacked information from pool owners. So we created an online Google survey to gather more data from that viewpoint. And then after collecting all this data, we moved on to the analysis phase by transcribing the interviews, reviewing the survey responses, and identifying key themes and trends.
With the data we collected from our quantitative research, we were able to use these 2 equations to estimate the sort of net contribution of chloride from salt chlorine pools in the watershed. So the first equation there estimates the total mass of salt sodium chloride in tons from salt chlorine pools within the watershed. The second equation there uses that data to estimate the total tons of chloride specifically from salt chlorine pools. If you have any questions about the inputs or assumptions that went into these models, please feel free to fire them off in the Q&A. And so we've got one more mentee here, and given the background and context that you just heard, as well as your own expertise in this area, we wanted to do a little bit of a pulse check and get a sense of what your opinions are. So what percentage of chloride runoff do you think comes from salt chlorine pools within the watershed? So we'll wait.
To give people a little bit of time to give their answer. I was going fishing with my brother last year, and we were ice fishing. We had set up and drilled our holes and everything, and then what happened is we hear this this echo. There's no fish down there. I'm like, what? Who is that? There's no fish down there. And I was like, oh my gosh, what is that from a higher power? What's going on? Who is that? He's like, it's the rink manager. I told you I'd get one in. John, what do we have?
I'm both. No, I wanted you to kind of just like lay in that one. That was good. I respected that. Yeah, so we're seeing results trickle in. We've got anywhere between 0.5% and 30%. So a wide range of estimates there. And this is a great segue into our 4 key findings. The first of which is that there's limited evidence to support the idea that salt chlorine pools contribute significantly to chloride runoff in the 9 Mile Creek watershed. Specifically, our estimate is that chloride runoff from salt chlorine pools could account for only about 0.03% to 0.21% of actual annual inflows. As a little bit more of a visual there, we sort of modeled 2 scenarios, a minimal inflow and a maximum inflow. Those are depicted here as a percentage or as a portion of total total runoff in tons per year. And you can see that our minimum inflow scenario only contributes about 2 tons per year of chloride, and our maximum inflow contributes about 13 tons per year. The salt chlorine pool contribution bar of those graphs is supposed to be black, but it is so small it effectively blends in with the x-axis, which is why you see it called out there in the graph itself. What we kind of then found as we conducted our literature review and interviews was details about the specific sources of chloride within the watershed. The two primary sources of chloride within the Twin Cities metro area as a whole are winter maintenance activities, so salt, applied to roads, parking lots, and sidewalks during the winter. And then as a secondary source, water softener brine discharges, which are discharged to municipal wastewater treatment plants. In the 9 Mile Creek watershed specifically, the first one, so winter maintenance activities, is far and away the largest source of chloride in the watershed. Water softener brine, just due to how water is softened in cities in the area, is likely a much smaller source, but still much larger than salt chlorine pools.
So our second finding is that current pool regulations vary by city within the watershed. And most municipalities that we spoke with don't specifically regulate salt chlorine pools. From our conversations, we found that cities within the 9 Mile Creek watershed did not track salt chlorine pools within the permitting process. That means they didn't require permits to report the sanitation mechanism used within each pool, whether it was traditional chlorine, salt chlorine, or otherwise, shown on the excerpt quote on the right-hand side of this slide. The permit process also varied by cities, which was something that pool installers we interviewed found frustrating. One installer we spoke with went so far as to fluctuate installation costs because of the complexity of a given city's permit process. The inconsistency in permitting makes measuring the exact number of salt chlorine pools difficult because the permit data does not specifically call out the number of pools type within a city. Additionally, our research group found accessing the pool permit data difficult. To be clear, we're not reporting that the data didn't exist, but we were limited by the data our interviewees provided and what we could collect within our project timeframe. Beyond permitting, once pools are built, some cities within the watershed regulate pool drainage and backwash completely differently. Some have specific requirements for salt chlorine pools, but most simply require pool owners to discharge backwash into a stormwater inlet. 2 cities lack specific drainage requirements in their own municipal code, but they may defer to the 9 Mile Creek Watershed District for guidance. Our third finding states that the specific effects of salt chlorine pools within the watershed are not well understood, and there's limited data to describe their popularity and prevalence. Through our research, we found that many of our interviewees didn't definitively understand the impacts of chlorine in the environment. For example, when they were asked where they had seen the effects of chloride in the 9 Mile Creek watershed, one city employee stated that they knew the salt affected the vegetation on the side of the road, but that they weren't readily able to point out to other effects of chloride impacts in the environment. Our qualitative research from the online survey sought out to find why pool owners were choosing to build or convert to a salt chlorine pool. As you can see on the graph shown here, their reasons as to why respondents have a salt chlorine pool vary from the belief that salt chlorine pools have less maintenance and cost than a traditional chlorine pool, that the salt chlorine water is better for skin and swimwear, and several even pointed out that the pool was included with the home that they purchased, so they kept it that way. So even though this data collected is small, it provides possible explanations why people own salt chlorine pools, excuse me. But we recognize that the survey data is not comprehensive or conclusive. After analysis of these responses, it's difficult to know just how popular the trend of salt chlorine pools actually are. Our fourth finding states that among interviewees that we spoke with, there's no real awareness of or data collected about the environmental justice and equity implications of salt chlorine pools. We found that there wasn't much data to support our third research question regarding environmental justice and equity issues. We say this due to the lack of studies or data written about salt chlorine pools themselves. So of course, if there's nothing written about those, when applying an environmental justice or equity lens to the topic, we found virtually nothing during our literature review. We asked the environmental justice or equity issues. We asked what environmental justice or equity issues salt chlorine pools may cause. The feedback we received from those that we spoke with was that it wasn't on their radar. This could be due to the scarce amount of pollution the salt chlorine pools cause. To be clear though, this finding does not mean that there are no discrepancies of environmental justice or equity surrounding potential chlorine pollution.
And that leads us to our major recommendations here. The first of which is to improve permit data consistency and detail. This will help make any future research into salt chlorine pools and their chloride contribution more robust. Our recommendation specifically is to require pool owners to report the sanitation system they intend to use in permit applications. Our second recommendation is to collaborate with installers to educate pool owners on proper drainage and backwash procedures. This will help improve overall awareness of and adherence to city pool ordinances by allowing pool installers and city officials to clarify the specific permitting process, which is a pain point that we identified in our interviews. It will also allow them to clearly outline the drainage and maintenance requirements so an individual pool owner can understand what their specific city requires. Education will also help to improve compliance by specifying those drainage and backwash practices, but we also recommend that education help communicate the environmental impact of chloride as a whole. Our third recommendation is to collaborate with the Metropolitan Council to consider directing discharge to the sanitary sewers. So while salt chlorine pools do not contribute significantly to chloride runoff, they are fairly easy to regulate. Some cities have key provisions in their ordinances to direct that runoff and that discharge to the sanitary sewer. This is a pair of ordinances that should be considered in partnership and collaboration with the Metropolitan Council, who oversees connections to the sanitary sewer. So our principal recommendation here is to direct that discharge to the sanitary sewer. However, if a hookup is unavailable, to dechlorinate the salt chlorine pools and then discharge over a permeable surface would be the best alternative. And finally, our recommendation is to research the impacts of excess chloride on marginalized populations. This was a gap in understanding that we uncovered throughout our interviews, and we know that we need more research to understand the possible impacts on these communities. And so we recommend that interested cities study the environmental equity implications of excess chloride further to uncover any disproportionate environmental or economic impacts. We've also, as part of this, put together a data collection plan, which interested parties can access in this presentation in the appendix, which we hope will further future research. We would now
thank everybody for coming today. John, sorry, did I cut you off?
Oh, I was just going to say we'd now like to open it up for questions.
Yeah. So before we do that, yeah, thank you everybody for coming. I am going to post our fact sheet, which is basically a 2-pager that covers a lot of the work that we did. That is going to be in the chat with a link. So that'll be up for quite a while. Leslie?
All right. Well, thank you, Dan and John, and as well as Eric and Ashley on your presentation. Now we can take some questions for the student group. If you have questions, please put them into the chat box. We already have some. While you're thinking of your questions, I do want to ask Dan or John. I know you mentioned earlier that you had also done some research or at least connecting with people outside of Minnesota. You mentioned specifically Santa Clarita, I think it was. Can you talk a little bit about your findings just from other parts of the country and what they're doing related to salt chlorine pools?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that question. Yeah, during our literature review, we looked at a number of different municipalities across the country, particularly the southern states, and we came upon the city of Santa Clarita. And during this project, I had a chance to interview a city employee from there and learned a few interesting things. The city of Santa Clarita is north of Los Angeles with a population of about 200,000. There's a 10-mile river that runs through the area, as you can see here on the map. So geographically, there are some similarities. I also learned the city has an interesting history of changing regulations of saltwater pools. In 2005, the city banned saltwater pool installations. Prior to the ban, farmers downstream of the Santa Clarita River claimed that there was a high chloride concentration affecting their crops, particularly noting their avocado trees and strawberries. The Water Quality Control Board determined that the cause was by the city's excess chloride discharge. And then around the same time, California enforced a chloride TMDL for the Santa Clarita River. And so this led the city ban on saltwater pool installations in 2005. And because it was, they banned that particularly because it was considered a controllable source of chloride. And then in 2009, they lifted the ban, but reduced permissible excess chloride from 180 milligrams per liter to 100 milligrams per liter. And so today, actually, the city requires a pump truck to come to the resident's home. They take that water to a specialized water treatment center, and then eventually it goes into the ocean. California is obviously a very different context and geography than Minnesota, but that particularly kind of the learning, understanding the full life cycle of a city regulation on this very niche topic was insightful to our group.
All right, thank you for that interesting side note. Okay, so we have a couple of questions in the chat box. So the first one is, shouldn't the salt generator convert most of the chloride from salt to chlorine and leave negligible chloride in the discharge? So this is a good question. I will admit I don't own a pool and I really don't know how pools operate. So maybe you can help people understand how that works.
So I still don't think any of us would claim to be complete pool experts. And I think there is some disagreement among pool owners as well as to what their standard practice is for the different types of pools that they own. But from our understanding, so yes, you're right. I mean, the salt generator does convert salt into chloride. However, there is backwashing, and I think it looks like Randy, a few notes down in the chat, talked about that. Yes, not all pools require occasional backwash, but when pools backwashing, they force the water from the pool back through the filter to clean it out, essentially. And so there's some discharge there that may include water. Like if you did that, the day after you just added your weekly or monthly amount of salt, there'd be salt in that water. And then also on the rare occasions, and it is usually very rare, once every 10 years or some catastrophic event happens and you have to completely empty your pool, that would be another time where if you don't have the option to wait until all of the salt has been changed into chlorine, then that would be another instance where you could be emptying a huge volume of salt water into the storm water or wherever else that person is choosing to do that. So, short answer, yes, it should convert most of it. That's part of why we found such a negligible impact. But there are instances where people would be emptying salt water into the environment.
Well, just to add to that, in fact, as we were working on this project, I got a call from a resident who had installed a brand new pool. It was an above ground pool. It was a saltwater pool, and they, for some reason, it was built incorrectly. There was some subsidence. It was actually half the pool was sinking. So she wanted to drain the entire pool. And per our ordinance, it would have to be drained down the storm drain, or to the nearest storm drain, is what our ordinance in Minnetonka says. And so it was sort of a timely call or message, because we're looking at this topic, but I didn't really have much to tell her, because she, she had to do what the ordinance says, or she puts it somewhere on her property, and then there's no guarantee that that salt in the water is going to impact the landscaping or wherever they're going to put it. So I guided her and said, hopefully you can find a place on your property where you can discharge it and not down the storm drain. However, our ordinance suggests you put it down the storm drain, so it's kind of a tricky situation. All right. The next question we have is, did the research check into whether the Minnesota Department of Health, and specifically Steve Clem, if the department tracks salt-chlorine when doing plan review?
That, unfortunately, we had tried to connect with Steve, and unfortunately we're unable to connect with him for the duration of this project. So we were hoping he could offer more insight into that, but that information was unfortunately not included in our results here.
Okay. The next question is, any idea on how many pools are actually saltwater pools versus salt chlorinated pools or salt chlorine pools?
Yeah, I can take that one. So in the several instances that I talked to the pool installers and pool company owners, we received a little bit different input about the breakdown. One of them said that it was kind of interesting. She said that in the 80s, this was like a really popular trend. And then it started to come back, in her estimation, maybe like about 5 to 10 years ago. But it was maybe trending downward due to their sales. She said that right now she's about, I think it's 55-45 for traditional pools for 55. The other installer that I talked to, he actually, he talked to me about not dissuading pool owners from going with saltwater, but informing them that saltwater causes a lot more corrosion, right? And so basically what he sees is the life of the pool may not be as long. So he is down to about 20% of the pools that he does are salt chlorine pools.
And just to clarify, that's of new installations like this year. That's not like 20% of existing pools are salt chlorine or, yeah. So the percentage of the total pools is much smaller than that.
Yeah, and this is sort of the reasoning behind our recommendation to clarify permit data. The exact sanitation mechanism is not right now called out within that data. So in terms of reviewing city permitting and information about like pools installed within a city, there's no way of, right now clarifying salt chlorine, traditional chlorine, or salt water.
Yeah, I know in Minnetonka I asked one of our planners, and they estimated we've had maybe upwards of 60 pool permits in the last 5 years. And this is, above ground and below ground. But we don't track anything related to the, if it's saltwater or salt chlorine, any, maintenance or discharge protocols. So we don't collect any of that kind of information. It's a pool, it's being installed, and that's about it. So that's a good recommendation to have, is to maybe track this a little bit better. Okay, we don't have any other questions in the chat box. Just a reminder that Dan did put a link to a URL that goes to the handout or the fact sheet that they have developed. So you're welcome to get that information. But are there any other questions? I think we have at least a few enough people that if you had something burning, you could shout it out if you'd like. I'll give a minute. Otherwise, that is all we have. So I would like to thank our Capstone students. In completing this project, they, I think, get to graduate now. So yay for you guys. Other than that, I'd like to thank Erica Snagowski with 9 Mile for helping co-host, and then Brooke Asleson with the PCA. Again, she was not able to be here today, but we appreciate her. She was involved in some of the behind the scenes of this project as well. So with that, I thank everybody. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Good job, you guys. I will head off here.
Yeah, thank you. That was a great presentation.
you.
Yep. Good
Good job,
job.
guys.
Thanks, you
Bye.
guys. Bye.